right, good morning. And again, thank God for all of you. We have made it into the year of 2022. What a blessing it is. You can see some of the fanfare from our watch service in the back of me right there. Again, we thank God. We had a great celebration. The last day in 2021 had great testimony, a great service. And again, we thank God for all of you that tuned in. Those of you that showed up in person, what a great service we had. And again, all praises to God. To all of you, again, we thank God for the first Sunday in 2022. Again, thank God for that. Hey, just a quick note, the roads are very good. I think we end up with about 2 inches of snow, 2 inches, maybe a little bit more than that, but the roads are okay. And so again, for those who are looking out there saying, I wonder how bad it is, I'm kind of telling you from my perspective, coming in, the roads are okay. We've got several individuals that are here in the sanctuary now. And the indication is that the roads are okay. They come from different parts of the city. So those of you that are coming, again, thank God, be safe. At the end of the day, trust your judgment, trust God, and whatever you do. Again, want you to be safe no matter what. We did make sure on watch service night that communion was placed out for those to take communion home just in case the weather was crazy. Again, we will be doing communion today. What a blessing that is as we start the service on today. We're thankful, again, to have the first Sunday and the first communion of the year of 2022. Again, we're thankful. Let me again ask you to like and share. I shared this story with you last week about an altercation that took place in a church, and it's amazing that that altercation by itself received over 500,000 shares. It's interesting that we'll share an altercation, but we won't share the gospel. And that's the thing that people need to understand. Let's share the gospel. It doesn't take you but a second to go to your like or your share button and share the gospel. We've been saying that now for the last 3 years. Like and share. All right? I want everybody to hear this, and that's part of our goal. Our goal this year is biblical production, producing fruit for the kingdom. John chapter 15, you're going to hear some of that today. But part of production means sharing the gospel, okay? Sharing the gospel. And so I hope that you'll share the gospel. I hope that you'll be a witness for the kingdom. And I hope that you will help us with our goals this year. You'll get some of that today when you come in the sanctuary. You'll get our goals, what we're planning to do this year, and how you can help us out, okay? Everybody needs to help. Okay, everybody needs to help. No age, there is no age criteria. All of us need to help us achieve our goals, and I believe we're going to do very well with those goals. Amen. All right. So again, all of our virtual listeners from Kansas all the way down to Florida, all the way down to Battle Creek, Portage, and all of the surrounding cities, again, we welcome you. To all of you tuned in right now, again, we welcome you to be a part of our Life Development Hour today. Our programs will start again this upcoming week. Everything that we're doing now is still predicated on the temperature of the virus in our city and in our state. Okay? Right now, we're going to continue to meet. Right now, we're going to continue to hold services. All we're asking you to do when you come in is to sign in, number one, and number two, make sure that you keep your mask on while you're in the building. That's all we ask. We're not doing all the other things. Most of our people are vaccinated, but we already know vaccination doesn't mean that you can't catch or become contaminated with one of the viruses. But we're going to do the best that we can, okay? All right. So again, thank God for all of you. Hey, let's get into this last piece of this lesson entitled Favor. You can expect that during the course of the year, I'm going to come back and continue to unpack this thought on favor. I want to get into our theme I want to start teaching on that. And so that's what I'll be doing next week. So I want to kind of close the book on Esther today, and I think we'll do well. Esther, God's process for blessing believers. All of us know the story of Esther. She was the queen. We know her story. She was an infant adopted by a relative. As they came into or out of the captivity, she ultimately ends up as one of the king's potential harems, or one of his concubines, if you will. We know this story. Get your Bibles, go check it out. And what we discover is that the Bible tells us that Esther was a very beautiful lady. What the king does at the end of the day, the king decides to look for another queen because Vashti pretty much defied him. And back during that day, you didn't come to the king unless you were asked. When the king asked, you came. You didn't come with him with a sad countenance on your face. All of those things, they could cause you to be killed on the spot. Vashti decided when the king summoned her, she wasn't going. And then the king made a law that she was never to come before him again. And then he started the process. Now, I want you to kind of get the underlying thing happening here. This is God moving. He knows right now that the children of Israel, or Judah, or Jews, because Jews, the first time you hear it being singled out is in this book when it talks about Mordecai. God knows that there is going to be an attempt to exterminate all the Jews. And God positions Mordecai and Esther to be in a position to save the Jews themselves. You read the story. I've told you when you look through this book, Esther's initial name was not initially Esther. I've tried to give you a couple FYIs, as it relates to Esther in the book. I've shared with you that the Bible tells us that Mordecai was her uncle, but he really was her cousin who adopted her. But at some point, you will see that it says that he is her uncle in the text. All that's in the scriptures. All you got to do is look at it. Is right there in the text. And I think that's critical for you to see as we go through the text itself. Well, here we are. Esther has now been put in a situation where she has to beautify herself for a year as she gets ready to go before the king. That says a whole lot to me about him, but also about them. One, at the end of the day, we've got to be willing to learn how to wait for the person that God has for us. That's on both sides. And there shouldn't be a compromise. The king wanted them to be a certain way. He wanted them to have the art of etiquette, wanted them to look good and know how to groom themselves well. And he waited for that over a year. Okay? By the same token, these young ladies learned how to be patient and to get themselves together. I'm saying that to all of us. Don't be so quick to rush into marriage. Don't be so quick to rush into living with someone or saying I do. Pray and ask God to help you as you are looking for the soulmate that God has for you. I think that's so critical to say. I think sometimes we bring calamity on ourselves when we jump into relationships that you didn't pray about. And I think we got to be careful as we go through that. Hopefully sometime this year, God will give us the opportunity to open that door on relationships, because I think it's critical. Right now in this community, over the last 3 years, domestic violence is up in this community. It's up in this community. And a lot of it is not husband and wives, it's live-in boyfriends and girlfriends fighting. That can be avoided if you learn how to wait for God. So long and short of it is, the king, says Sutton, says Schaefer, the king starts the process for individuals to come before him. And when Esther came, at the end of the day, it was done. Esther came, she was made the queen, and the king starts this process to honor Esther by holding, if you will, holding a festival. He holds a festival for Esther, but he holds one for himself. Now watch how God increases Esther's favor. When the king, Ahasuerus, holds these banquets, he also releases a lot of individuals that had been incarcerated, and he does some other phenomenal things. Well, guess what the people did? They attributed that to Esther. So Esther won favor even among people that didn't know her. What am I saying to you? God will give you favor with people that don't know you, because he uses those things to help achieve his divine purpose. All right? As I push this a little bit, says these, it's important to know that not only will God give you favor, but people around you, God will give favor. Now, let me make sure we understand this. Your favor is person specific, which means that nobody can get your favor. So stop worrying about that. Your favor is your favor. God is not going to give me your favor and not going to give you my favor. What's for you is for you. And it doesn't matter what people say or do. When God decides to favor you, nobody can unfavor or block your favor. Okay? It's important for you to understand as we go forward. God has the power, even in trials and situations, to still shower you with favor. So let's bring Mordecai into the picture. Mordecai is connected to Esther. And we've already discovered that Mordecai got word that two people were talking about assassinating the king. What does Mordecai do? He goes and talks to Esther. Then Esther goes and talks to the king. I want you to get that, because it's critical to the closure of what we're going to do today. All right? It is because of Mordecai that the king's life was saved. All right? I want you to just put a pin right there. We're coming back to that. That's critical. Well, what does that do for the king and Esther? It increases her worth and her value with the king. All right? Now, let me throw this piece in there, because I think you need to understand, even when you have favor, you need to understand that at the end of the day, there will be people that dislike you because God is giving you favor. Okay? Brother Williams, it doesn't matter how nice you try to be to everybody. Okay? You can be a nice guy and people will dislike you because you're nice. He's just too nice. Every time I see him, he always got a smile on his face. You know, you got to understand, everybody at the end of the day are not going to like you. And they're certainly going to not have good words to say when you have the favor of God. So what happens in this text at the end of the day, let's fast forward. Here Esther is. She is in her position as queen. They do not know at this point, because Mordecai has told her, be silent about your lineage, about where you came from. She was a Jew. It's good to take good advice. It's good to take good advice. So what happens? The king, and you'll see this in chapter 2, chapter 3 of Esther. I won't try to go through all of that. The king appoints or elevates one of his servants by the name of Haman. All right? He appoints Haman to a leadership position. And at the end of the day, because Haman had been elevated, that means now people bow down to him. When Haman comes in, people bow down and acknowledge him. Well, Mordecai would not do that. And I believe part of Mordecai's reasoning for doing that is Mordecai, because he was a Jew and understood that we ought not bow to anyone, made that his decision. The text doesn't quite unpack that, but that's the general theory that theologians will say. Well, guess what? Haman becomes furious with Mordecai because he would not bow. Now, one of the things that I hope you'll see in this is Haman has a pretty big ego. He loves the fact that he's been elevated, And he loves the fact that when he walks in the room, people bow down to him and shower him and favor him and all that stuff there. Mordecai wouldn't do it. So what Haman decides to do is Haman says, not only do I want to kill Mordecai, but I want to kill his entire race. Mordecai is a Jew. I want to tie the pieces now. I want you to get this. It's in the first 3 chapters. You'll see everything I'm talking about. We've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. So Mordecai then sets out to kill all of the Jews. You know the Jews are the chosen people of God, right? They are descendants of Abraham. Mordecai cannot stand them because they're Jews. So what does Mordecai do? Mordecai then goes to the king. Haman goes to the king. Haman goes to the king. Haman wants to extinguish Mordecai and all the Jews. So Haman goes to the king. Now watch this. Unaware that the queen, now Esther, is a Jew, Haman goes to the king and says, we need to kill all the Jews. The king says, go ahead and sign a decree. The decree has been signed. I want you to publish this all around the provinces that they're going to be exterminated. Now, you've got all the pieces. Watch what Mordecai does when he hears this. When Mordecai hears this, Mordecai now goes to Esther, the king's queen, who is a Jew, but the king doesn't know it, and no one knows it, and says to her, don't think that when they start killing us that you're going to be spared because you are the queen. Okay? Sometimes what you've got to do is you've got to press the favor. You've got to step out on a line when you have favor. So what does Esther do? You saw it in the text, and I want to point it out to you in the text. I want you to see it for yourself. Esther makes a decision. Esther makes a decision that she is going to stand before the king. Let me see if I can find it, because I want you to see it for yourself. In Esther chapter number 3, you'll have to help me, Deacon Roscoe, if you can find it. In Esther chapter 3, Esther has made a decision that Esther chapter 4, verse 15. Esther chapter 4, verse 15. Esther has now made a decision that the life of the Jews hangs on her having favor with the king. Watch this now. Text says, then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Watch this. Look at what she tells him. Okay? She says, go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan and fast for me. All right? She's calling on the saints, the Jews, to go in a fast for her. Watch what she does. Tell them, don't eat or drink for 3 days or nights. I and my maidens are going to do the same thing. And so I will then go into the king. Now, let me point out why this is critical. I said this to you before. You never approach the king unless you were summoned by the king. Why? Because the king could never tell who was trying to take his life, who was trying to assassinate him, poison him, etc. Nobody came before the king. Esther now is going to rely on her faith and her favor to walk before the king so that ultimately she can save the Jews from being exterminated. I like what she says in this text. I want you to see it in verse 16. All right? It says this. It says in verse 16, it says, go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, all right, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also, my maidens, will fast likewise. Watch what she says here. And so I will go in unto the king, which is not according to law. I'm about to break the law. But listen at her faith, and she believes her faith. She said, if I perish, I perish. Esther is willing to press her favor and her faith in God to ensure that the king will receive her when she comes. All right? I think that's critical for everybody to understand. When you have favor, sometimes you have to stretch your favor, especially when you know you have it. And I think that's critical for us. And so that brings me to this whole thing to understand now, Brother Patrick, that walking in favor also means walking a path that you have never walked before. When you have the favor of God, you've got to be willing to walk paths and engage in things that you've never engaged in before. I say that because remember this now, faith without works, says Jones, is dead. Okay? And we know that we have the favor of God. But favor is not a favor that's always one that won't take risk. Okay? Favor is one where you're not always too cautious, where you won't step out of. And so when I look at this, I want you to see it in Esther chapter number 5. Just fast forward to Esther chapter number 5. Verse number 1, and I want you to see now how God begins to press Esther, but also begin to start the process to save the Jews. Now, I started out telling you from day one that, remember I told you about the king, his life being taken or attempted. I told you about Mordecai. Mordecai got wind. Went to Esther, she told the king. King's life was spared. Now, this is going to slowly start to unpack right before your very eyes. Watch this. Look at verse number 1. He says that, now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. Watch this. Let's keep going. Now watch this now. And it was so when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, there it is, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Esther could have been killed right there. You never approach the king without being summoned. And by extending his scepter, that was him saying, I am accepting you to come before me. I told you when you have favor, sometimes you got to be willing to press into unknown territory. Esther has put her life on the line for the purpose of saving the entire race of Jews. Okay? That's critical for you to get as we go through this. Now watch this now. You got to keep this in mind. God created Esther in such a way that Esther was very beautiful. All right? Even when Esther was getting ready to see the king, she didn't need a whole lot of anything. God created her, and she was beautiful. Now watch what the king does when Esther comes. Watch what he does. Look at verse number 3. All right? In verse number 3, it says this. Then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? Now watch how mesmerized he is with her. I want to show you, it's right in the verse. I want to show you the power that Esther has. And let me just put it another way. The favor Esther has with the king right now. He says, what is thy request? He said, it shall be even given thee to the half of the kingdom. That's how much favor Esther has with the king. He said, look, I'll give you half the kingdom. All right? So when I tell you that favor ain't fair, I want you to see how favor operates in lives differently. You're seeing it right there. King was so moved by her beauty. Okay? He said, I'll give you half my kingdom. So what does Esther do in the text? I want you to see it. Esther answered in verse 4, say, if it seemed good to the king. Now watch Esther use her intelligence and wit to begin to plot to expose Haman, who hates the Jews, who, by the way, doesn't know that Esther is a Jew, but when he exterminates the Jews, he's going to kill Esther just as well. Watch what Esther does. Esther says, if it seemed good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I prepared. King, I want you to come and have lunch with me. All right. Have Haman come also. All right. Watch this now. Verse 5 says this. It says, then the king said, cause Haman and make haste. Haman, somebody go get Haman, that he may do as Esther have said. Look at the power that Esther has, the favor that Esther has. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. I want you to watch this begin to unfold. Let's keep going. Go to the next verse. Watch this. All right. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Here he is again, saying it again. All of this is because Esther has obtained favor with the king. Now, I want to show you that when you're obedient to God, you will obtain favor from God of the same type when you obey God. The king was willing to give her, there it is again, I'll give you half of my kingdom. Watch what Esther does in the very next verse. Esther said this. She said, here's my petition and my request. Watch what she says. Next verse. If I found favor, and she already knows that she has, if I found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and perform my request, let the king and Haman come to a banquet I shall prepare. And the king said, it's already done. All right? It's already done. Now, watch the text as we go forward. Look at verse number 9. I want you to see Esther's favor playing out to save the Jews. In verse number 9, Haman left that day with an inflated ego. The queen has asked for me and the king. She didn't ask for nobody else. I mean, you see the text right there. Okay, but on his way leaving, Haman ran into Mordecai. Remember now, he can't stand Mordecai. All right? He cannot stand him. All right? And you can see in the text, it says he was filled with indignation. Go to the next verse. Watch this now. I want you to see how mad he was. All right? But Haman refrained himself, and when he went home, he called for his friends and his wife. Watch what they do in the text. All right? Haman told them about the story of his riches. You know, he told them about all the things that the king had done for him, how the king had advanced him above everybody, but he had an issue. All right? He had an issue. Watch this. Let me move to verse number 12. Haman talks about the queen. The queen asked him to come to a banquet with the king on tomorrow. All right? But watch what he says in verse 13. He said, even though I got all this stuff going on for me, as long as Mordecai is alive, that Jew, I'm not going to be happy. So what does his family do? In the next verse, his family says, tell you what you do. Why don't you create a gallows that you can hang Mordecai on before you go to the banquet? See it right there in the text? All right? Create a banquet or a gallows that you can hang him on. So when you go to the banquet, man, you'll be happy. You ain't got no issues, no problems, none of that. And that made Haman happy. So what did he do? Haman caused the gallows to be made. All right. Now, Haman knew within 24 hours that he was going to be sitting at the king's table. All right. He couldn't stand Mordecai, and he wanted to get rid of him as soon as he can. Now, watch how God begins to unfold this, because one of the things that you have to understand, when God has decreed favor for you, it comes in God's timing. So watch this now. Within 24 hours, Haman and the king will be sitting at lunch or a banquet with Esther. Haman, within 24 hours or 23 hours, has already planned that he's going to arrest and kill Mordecai. Okay? Watch what God does in verse 1 of Haman chapter 6. I want you to see this. Remember now, I told you that when God has decreed favor for you, it comes in his timing only. Watch what God does. The king knows he's going to be eating with the queen and Haman on tomorrow. But watch what God does to the king. It says, on that night, could not the king sleep? Now watch this now. It's not that anything was going off, he just couldn't rest. So what does he do? He commands the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. He's going back looking at some things that he has done, some things that he has written. Now watch this now. Here it is right here. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bethania and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Remember I told you earlier that Mordecai told Esther, who then told the king? Watch this text here. Watch this. And the king said, what honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? Now, the king does not know at this time that Mordecai is a Jew, and he does not know that Esther is a Jew. The king remembers, man, I didn't do nothing for him. It says it right there. It says there was nothing done. When the king's life was saved, he never reacted to Mordecai, even though he was told by Esther that Mordecai was the one that did it. All right? I want to show you how favor comes on God's timing. The king could not sleep. Remember now, let me give you this scenario again. The queen has already said, King, I want you and Haman to come eat with me tomorrow. You got that, right? Mordecai has such an inflated ego. Man, I'm going to be sitting down with the queen and the king. Ain't nobody got it like that except for me. As he leaves the court, the king's palace, he runs into Mordecai. And he can't stand him because he knows Mordecai disrespects him by not bowing down to him. Haman then goes home, gets his friends together, and brags on his elevation and says, man, if I have to go to the palace tomorrow and see Mordecai, I'm going to be sick. I can't stand the guy. And they said, why don't you hang him before you go? So Haman is going to try to hang Mordecai before he go to the banquet. You with me so far? All right, now watch this. God calls the king not to sleep. And as the king could not sleep, the king calls for the records to be read from the Chronicles, and he remembers, you saw it for yourself, that Mordecai saved his life. And then it is unveiled that nothing was ever done for Mordecai. All right? So watch this. I want you to see this in the text as we go forward. All right? So it just so happens that the king says, it's right there in the text, the king says, well, who's in the court? And Haman had just came into the court, all right, to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai. You see it right there in the text? All right. Haman has come now. You know, he's got this inflated ego. He wants him to be hanged. And he says, who's in the court? Haman comes. Haman is now coming unto him. Move to the next verse. Watch this now. I want you to see how God is moving on this. So watch this now. Before Mordecai can say anything, the king said unto Mordecai, before Haman could say anything, the king says unto him, behold, Haman standeth, and the servant said unto him, behold, Haman stands in the court. And the king said, let him come in. Now watch this unfold. Watch this. So Haman comes in, And before Haman could say anything, the king says, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? In other words, I want to be a blessing to somebody that I really take honor, that I really admire. I really want to honor that person. Now watch this now. Watch this, Deacon Roscoe. In the verse right there, it tells you the whole story. Haman thought that the king was talking about honoring him. Y'all see that? Haman thought the king was talking about him. So in the next verse, unbeknownst to Haman, now notice now at this time, Haman then almost forgot about hanging Mordecai. Because now his focus is on, man, the king want to honor me. The king want to put me out there. So this what he said, it says, and Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Watch this. Go to the next verse. I want you to see this. He said, let the royal apparel be brought unto the king, which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king ride. Haman is saying, king, your royal robe and your chariot that you ride, all right? He said, and the crown that you wear, because see, Haman think all this is going to happen to him, all right? He said, take all of this stuff, king, and put it upon the head of the person that you want to honor. Because Haman thinks the king is talking about him. All right? He thinks the king is talking about him. Now watch this now, because his bubble is about to be bust. Go to the next verse, because I think I'm right there at where I should be. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of the one of the king's most noble princes. You can see all that right there. All right? I want to push you. I want you to see it in the text. Look at what he says down at the bottom of that verse. And I need to look at one where I can see it. Okay, so the king is talking about taking through the streets and proclaiming him and all that stuff there. It says, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delighted to honor. All right, you can see all that. Haman thinks this is all going to happen to him. Now watch verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, get this done quickly, and take the apparel and the horse, and as thou said, here it is, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew that sitteth at the king's gate, and let nothing fail of all thou hast spoken. Wait a minute, pause. Bro Finchers, you see this? Yeah. Now, Haman is having a moment right now. Hey, man, I want to show you something now. God's favor, when it has been decreed, it comes in God's timing. Haman thinks he is going to have all this done to him, but the king plans to favor Mordecai. Watch this now. This is what I want you to see. And the very person that wanted to take Mordecai's life is the person that the king has now made responsible to do everything that the king wants done. Well, that helps me say this to you, that at some point, God will make your enemies your footstool. God will make the very people that's trying to take you out turn around and honor you when you have God's favor. Look, Haman had to personally go and put that robe on him and ride him through the city and put the crown and all of the above. All right? I want you to see that now. I want you to see that in the text. So what happens? Look at verse number 11. I want you to see it for yourself. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse and arrayed Mordecai. I bet you he couldn't stand it. I bet he was sitting there cussing and biting his lip. he cannot stand Mordecai. Okay? Watch this now. And brought him on horseback through the streets of the city and proclaimed before him, thus shall be done unto the man whom the king honored. So he's riding. So here he is. Haman is riding Mordecai through the city saying, hey, this what happened when you honor the king. All right? I mean, can you just see his face right now? I mean, he probably fit to be tied. Now watch this now. I want you to see what happens. So Haman is angry and humiliated. After he did all that, look at verse 12. It says, and Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman was so outdone, he left and went home. Watch this. It says, but Haman hasted to his own house, crying, whining, mourning, and having this. He just flat out humiliated. Watch this now. I want you to see it, verse 13. And Haman told his wife and his friends everything that had happened. And then they said to him, man, you better change your strategy, because now this guy has honor with the king and you shall not prevail. Well, what am I trying to tell you? When you have favor, it doesn't matter what people try. It will not prevail. All right? It will not prevail. And so I want you to always understand this, that God's favor will always overshadow the enemy's plans. So fast forward. Go to Esther chapter number 7. He is upset that now, wait, let me go back. I want to go back, digging around, because I want people to see what happens to Haman in verse 14 of chapter 6. Because I want you to see what happened. While Haman is sitting there, and before he could develop another plan of what he's going to do, it says, and while they were yet talking with him, the king's chamberlain, the king's boys came to pick him up to take him to the banquet. Before he could figure out what to do, he was already being whisked away to the banquet. Now, mind you now, Haman had planned to kill Mordecai before the banquet, but he ends up parading Mordecai through the city on behalf of the king. He is so humiliated and so outdone, he goes home crying and whining, and his family says, look, you're in trouble now, man. I don't know what you're going to do, but you will not prevail. Before he could really respond, now he's being picked up to go to the banquet. He still does not know that Esther is a Jew. All right? Watch this now. Go to chapter 7. I want you to see it. Verse 1, it says, so Esther invites the king. So the king and Haman come to banquet with Esther the queen. Let's just keep walking through the verses. And the king said again to Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? And he goes on and tells, look, I'll give you half the kingdom. Esther has so much favor with the king. He is so serious. He said, look, I'll give you whatever you want. Watch how this begins to unfold in verse 3. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor, and she knows that she has, because the king has said, I'll give you up to half the kingdom. If I found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. The king still does not understand. She's asking the king to spare her life and the life of her people. Watch this. She says, for we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain. Stop there for a second. When Haman, who hated Mordecai, got the king to sign a decree to kill Mordecai and all the Jews, he also said, take everything they own, take it and bring it and give it to other people. So now the children of Judah, or the children of the Jews, now have nothing, and they're scheduled to all be killed. Esther is saying, we've been sold, and my people are to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we have been sold for bondage and bondsmen and bondswomen, I have held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Watch this. Watch what he's done. Watch what the king done. It said, then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther, the queen, who is he? Where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? Watch this. And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is the wicked Haman. And then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. Look at Esther's favor coming into play now to save Esther and the Jews. Okay? Look at Esther's favor. Watch what the king said. By this time, I'd be shaking and shivering. All right? Watch this. I hear you digging, Roscoe. Watch verse 7. And the king arising from the banquet of the wine. See, the king was happy. You know, he was a little bit merry. But when he found out that somebody was trying to kill, what's her name? Whatever little drunkenness he had, he got out of that real fast. It says, and the king arising from the banquet of the wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make requests for his life to Esther the queen. The king got up and left, and Haman started begging for his life from the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. The king was mad then. Man, you trying to kill my woman? You trying to kill her family? You trying to kill her race? See, what the king realized was he had been duped by Haman because Haman couldn't stand Mordecai. Now, not only has Haman seen Mordecai be elevated because of his favor, but he's now seeing the favor of Esther work to save Mordecai, herself, and her people. So what does he do? He say, look, if Esther got that much power that the king give her half the kingdom, maybe I can go to her and see if she can convince the king not to harm me. All right? Watch the text now. I want you to see it in the text. All right? And then it says in verse number 8, it says, then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman had fallen upon the bed where Esther lay. He back there crying and snot running off his face and all that stuff there. He know he in trouble now. I mean, he know he in trouble. All right? Then said the king, he said, will he force the queen also before me in the house? And the word went out of the king's mouth. They covered Haman's face. Watch this now. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold, watch this. Watch this. Behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him up on it. Y'all see that? The very thing that Haman planned to use to hang Mordecai, he's now being hung on it himself. When you have favor, your favor will always override the plans of the enemy. And that's what we see happening in this text. So the text says this in verse 10. So to hang Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was pacified, because the very person at the beginning of this whole process who couldn't stand the Jews, who decided to take them out, didn't realize that God had favor and God had purpose. God ultimately had Mordecai and Esther in the king's palace to save the Jews from extermination. That's how favor works. When you honor God, God has to honor you. That's what this whole process is about. Esther had favor that benefited her, that made her queen. Mordecai had favor that someone told him somebody was trying to kill the king. He stopped that from happening. The king forgot to honor him, but at the right moment, God stirred the king's spirit to remember what Mordecai had done, and God and the king honored Mordecai, the very person that Haman was trying to kill. That's how God operates. So I always tell people favor ain't fair, but thank God for your favor. Mordecai got his favor at the right time. Esther got her favor at the right time. And that's how this text ultimately ends when we start talking about the issue of favor. Esther knew she had found favor, says Blanche Williams, his Redeemer. Esther knew that her favor was going to work to her advantage. And she knew once she said to the king what he was doing, that that favor would spare her, Mordecai, and all the Jews. Your favor can be a blessing to other people. When you honor God, when you live God's way, you have to learn how to trust God in the process. Mordecai could have said, wait a minute, I was the one that saved the king. Y'all ain't gonna do nothing for me. Mordecai knew how to wait things out because he knew that God was operating through the entire process. So when you don't see what you think you should see from God, don't worry, your date is coming. Your favor is coming. And that's what God wants you to see. Here Mordecai is being whisked through the entire community by the person that has built a gallows to hang him. So now his enemy has to speak good words about him to the entire nation. You see it? And then to top things off, he goes before the queen, and the queen busts him to the king, and the king is so fierce he had to leave. Comes back and says, take him out there and hang him on the very thing he planned to hang Mordecai on. What am I saying to you? Don't worry about them traps and snares that people have set for you. When you've got God's favor, the very things they use to ensnare and harm you will come back to harm them in due time. That's what it boils down to. That's the lesson that we have to see going into 2022. We have God's favor. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what people try. I don't care what it looks like. When you have the favor of God, God will show you through his power how his favor will work to your advantage. God's process for blessing believers. This was one of those phenomenal lessons that's hidden in the Old Testament, but it ought to motivate you to understand, even now in this country, all right, in this country right now, don't think that the children of God will not have favor. You will, despite racism, despite the variants, the diseases, gun violence, and all the other stuff, you will have favor because God intends to show the world what he does for those that honor him first. All right, hey, next week, we're going to start doing some work in John chapter 15. I got to push us now to understand the theme for the year. The theme for the year is biblical production, producing fruit for the kingdom. Look at John chapter 15. That's where we're going to spend some time. We're going to spend some time in that in Bible study, preaching as well. Look forward to it. Get immersed in it so you can see it. It is a sample of all the scriptures that we'll start to unpack for you as we go forward. God expects us to get some work done this year. All right? He does not want bench members. He wants people that are active for the kingdom. We're going to talk a lot about that over the next couple of weeks to come. And this is for everybody, starting here and coming to you. Let's get some work done on behalf of the kingdom, okay? Hey, take a minute. If you're coming, I trust that you'll get here safely. Take your time getting here. We do plan to give communion. So again, take some time, get ready. If you've got your communion and you're not coming, let's make ready. I'll see you in about 30 minutes. I'll see you then. Let's get ready for our first worship service of the year. God bless.